This is the case with the most insane twist you'll ever hear. The horrifying story of the Carr family. Daniel, Elaine, and their two children, Emma and Jacob, shocked an entire town when what looked like a simple disappearance turned into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. In this documentary, we'll go step by step into how their lives unraveled and the jaw-dropping truth that no one saw coming. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay active so you never miss these unbelievable true crime cases. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories like this one, the kind that keep you thinking long after the video ends. The Carr family seemed like the kind of people you'd walk past without a second thought. Daniel Carr was well respected in Cedar Falls, a hardworking contractor who often left for jobs before sunrise and returned home late in the evening. His wife, Elaine, was known for her quiet presence, rarely social, but always polite when she had to be. Their two children, Emma and Jacob, attended the local school, and while they were never in trouble, teachers noticed they were unusually reserved for kids their age. On the surface, nothing about the Carrs stood out. They blended in so perfectly that most neighbors admitted they didn't really know them, even after years of living just a few doors away. But if you looked a little closer, small cracks appeared. Neighbors remembered that the Carrs kept their blinds drawn at all hours of the day. Delivery drivers would comment on how quickly packages were taken inside, sometimes within seconds of being set down. Visitors, even close relatives, were never invited inside the house. When the Carrs hosted barbecues, the gathering always happened in the backyard, never in the living room or kitchen. These details might have seemed trivial at first, but they created an atmosphere of secrecy that became impossible to ignore once things began to unravel. People in town described the Carrs as nice but distant, like they were always putting on a performance. Elaine was often seen at the grocery store, but never lingered to chat. Daniel attended Sunday services, but he was the type to slip in at the last minute and leave before anyone could start a conversation. Their children rarely attended birthday parties or after-school activities, which made them something of a mystery to their classmates. It wasn't that the family was unfriendly, they simply seemed to exist on the edges of normal life, careful never to let anyone too close. What no one realized at the time was that this careful distance was deliberate. While most people assumed the Carrs valued privacy, some neighbors admitted that their behavior left them unsettled. It was as if the family was hiding behind invisible walls, present but unreachable. Still, in a small town like Cedar Falls, odd behavior usually faded into background noise. People gossiped for a while, then moved on, until the Carrs' name became little more than a passing thought. Nobody knew that behind the closed blinds of that ordinary-looking house, something was already in motion, something that would soon shock the entire community. The disappearance of the Carr family was first noticed not by relatives, but by neighbors who found small details too strange to ignore. Their mailbox began to overflow. Newspapers piled up at the end of the driveway, and the children hadn't been seen walking to school for days. At first, people assumed the family had gone on a trip, but what unsettled them was how suddenly it seemed to happen. Daniel's truck and Elaine's car were both sitting in the driveway, covered in the fine layer of dust that only gathers after days of being untouched. Eventually, concern grew too heavy to ignore, and after a week of silence, relatives were contacted and a missing persons report was filed. When police entered the Carr home, they were met with a scene that made their stomachs tighten. The front door was locked from the inside, meaning no one had broken in or forced their way out. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. as if someone had pressed pause on the family's life. Dinner plates set on the dining table, one fork halfway through a bite of food, the food itself, now dried and rotting. Lights were still on in the kitchen and living room, casting a sickly yellow glow that made the silence even more uncomfortable. The television was playing quietly in the background, looping a late-night infomercial. It looked as though the family had simply stood up mid-meal and vanished into thin air. What struck investigators was the absence of the usual signs of distress. No broken glass, no overturned furniture, no blood, and no footprints leading away from the house. Even the family dog, usually loud and territorial, was nowhere to be found. Every room in the house was neat and untouched, with personal belongings, like phones, wallets, and jackets, left exactly where they should be. This made no sense. If the family had gone somewhere willingly, why leave behind everything they would need? If they had been forced out, how had it happened so quietly? The longer police combed through the house, the more unnerving it became. The Carr's beds were neatly made, but the sheets felt warm enough to suggest someone had slept in them recently. A single lamp upstairs was still on, yet there were no fresh clues to follow, no signs pointing to where the family might have gone. It was the kind of case that pulled officers into silence, forcing them to admit that what they were seeing didn't add up. In Cedar Falls, gossip spread fast, and by the end of that day, the quiet disappearance of the Carr family was on everyone's lips. As investigators dug into the Carr family's history, the clean image they had presented to neighbors began to crumble. The first cracks appeared when police examined Daniel's professional records. On paper, he was a successful contractor, taking on home renovations and construction projects across Cedar Falls. But financial documents told a different story. Several of his past clients had accused him of overcharging and cutting corners. A decade earlier, he had even been a suspect in a fraud investigation involving falsified invoices. The case had quietly disappeared from court records, but detectives began to wonder how. Someone had either covered for him, or Daniel had found a way to buy his silence. Elaine's background raised even more eyebrows. While she had no criminal history, her bank accounts told a story of their own. She maintained several accounts under her maiden name, and investigators found deposits in amounts that didn't match her lifestyle. The deposits were irregular, sometimes spaced months apart, sometimes appearing just days after one another. None of them came from Daniel's work. It was money with no clear origin, quietly tucked away as if she were preparing for something. Friends and family were shocked when this detail surfaced, claiming Elaine had never shown signs of living beyond her means. But secrecy had clearly been part of the family's way of life. The most disturbing revelation came when officers searched the Carr home more thoroughly. Behind a false wall in the basement, they uncovered a hidden room no one in the neighborhood knew existed. Inside, there was a table stacked with photographs. These weren't family portraits or childhood memories. They were faded Polaroids of people, strangers, some alone, some grouped together, each one marked with the thick red X. None of the faces matched anyone in the missing persons databases, but the collection spanned years. Some photos were as recent as a few months before the Carrs vanished. The basement room also contained notebooks filled with dates and locations, written in Daniel's handwriting, though the meaning of the notes was unclear. For investigators, the discovery turned everything upside down. What started as a missing persons case was now layered with disturbing questions. Were the Carrs victims of something sinister, or were they hiding the truth about who they really were? The photographs hinted at something larger, something connected to people beyond Cedar Falls. Detectives had no way of knowing if these photos were trophies, warnings, or records of something darker. What was certain, however, was that the Carr's disappearance no longer looked like a mystery of chance. It looked like the unraveling of a double life. Just as police were preparing to treat the Carrs as potential suspects rather than victims, the case veered in a completely unexpected direction. The discovery came from a nearby convenience store only 2 miles from the Carr residence. Detectives had requested surveillance footage covering the days leading up to the family's disappearance, hoping to catch sight of them leaving town or making a purchase. What they found was far more disturbing. The footage showed the Carr family, alive and together, being forced into their own van late at night. A masked figure stood behind them, holding what appeared to be a firearm, directing them inside with calculated movements. The image was grainy, but there was no mistaking the panic on Elaine's face or the way Daniel tried to shield his children. This footage flipped the investigation on its head. The photographs in the basement, the hidden accounts, and Daniel's murky past now raised even more questions. Had someone uncovered the Carr's secrets and decided to take revenge? Or had the family's secret life caught up with them in a way no one had anticipated? When the van was located days later, abandoned on a remote dirt road, the confusion only deepened. The vehicle had been wiped completely clean, with no fingerprints, no DNA, and no trace evidence left behind. It was as if someone had staged the entire disappearance with surgical precision. The real shock came when forensic analysis picked up a partial print on the outside door handle, faint enough that it had been missed in the first sweep. When cross-checked through databases, the match left investigators stunned. The fingerprint belonged to Gregory Carr, Daniel's estranged brother, a man believed to have died in an accident more than 10 years earlier. Records showed Gregory had been involved in violent disputes with Daniel in the past, mostly over money and property. Their falling out had been so severe that Daniel never mentioned him again, leading most people to assume the chapter was closed forever. Yet here was proof. Gregory was alive. And not only alive, but standing at the center of this disappearance. The revelation threw the investigation into chaos. If Gregory had faked his own death, why resurface now? Why target his brother's family after so many years in hiding? And what connection, if any, did he have to the mysterious photographs in the basement? What had once seemed like a family hiding dark secrets was now twisted into a revenge story far more elaborate than anyone had imagined. The Carrs were not running from strangers, they were trapped in the shadow of their own bloodline. Months passed before the mystery finally broke open. It was early spring when a group of hikers exploring the thick woods outside Cedar Falls stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin that looked long abandoned. The windows were boarded, and the roof sagged under years of neglect. But when the hikers pushed open the door, they were met with the unmistakable stench of decay. Authorities were called immediately, and what they found inside the cabin confirmed the town's worst fears. The remains of Daniel, Elaine, Emma, and Jacob Carr were discovered, each positioned in a way that suggested they had been kept there for weeks before their deaths. The scene was grim, but the details inside told an even darker story. Scattered across the floor and nailed to the cabin's walls were documents, photographs, and notebooks, evidence connecting Gregory Carr to a string of disappearances stretching across the state. Many of the unknown faces from the photographs in the Carr basement appeared again here, but now with newspaper clippings of missing persons taped alongside them. Investigators realized that the hidden room in the Carr home had been misunderstood. It wasn't proof of Daniel's crimes, but evidence he had collected in an attempt to track Gregory. Daniel hadn't been hiding his family out of guilt, he had been hiding them out of fear. The financial accounts under Elaine's name suddenly made sense as well. They were not signs of corruption or greed, but reserves meant to keep the family prepared to flee at a moment's notice. The Carrs had been living under constant pressure, building invisible walls between themselves and the outside world, hoping to stay off Gregory's radar. For years, they had succeeded, but Gregory's return proved inevitable. His obsession with revenge had driven him to stage his own death and slip into the shadows, resurfacing only when he was ready to strike. The discovery of the cabin closed the mystery but left behind a haunting lesson. To their neighbors, the Carrs had always seemed distant, secretive, and strange. But the truth was far more tragic. Their isolation was not a sign of guilt, but a desperate attempt at survival. They had been prisoners of Gregory long before he finally appeared at their door. In the end, the Carrs weren't monsters hiding dark secrets. They were victims of one man's obsession, caught in a web of blood ties that ended in the most horrifying twist imaginable.